In healthcare, still, you can't really market yourself by advertisements or newspapers or radio. It takes word of mouth, it takes actual patient experience.
In this episode, I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Suchin Bajaj, who's the founder and director of Ujala Signals Healthcare Services.
It's very difficult to convince a doctor to work in a small town in an unknown hospital because your natural pathways go to a big city. I remember when we were starting the first hospital in Panipat, everyone said, "Ulti Ganga बहा रहे हो तुम." लोग छोटे शहर से दिल्ली आते हैं काम करने. You are already in Delhi in one of the biggest hospitals, and now you want to leave everything and go to a small town. How does that work? We walk the talk, we take the treatment where we offer the community treatment. My daughter was born in one of our own hospitals. My son has had 2 surgeries in one of our hospitals. So we use the exact same services that we offer to the community because we are very confident that these are high quality services. When the COVID vaccines came out, there was so mistrust about it, so much mistrust. So I was the one who sat in the hospital and said, "I'll take the first vaccine." So leading by example is always easier when you yourself are qualified and you yourself can do it. We are aiming to be healthcare's Vishwa Guru by 2047. It won't be achieved by building 1,000, 2,000 bed robotic hospitals in big cities. It will be achieved when each and every citizen, whether they be a villager, whether they be a small town person, are able to access emergency healthcare within 20 minutes of their household, where your PIN code doesn't determine your destiny, whether you're going to survive a heart attack or not.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of our series, The Bold Voices, an initiative of Voice of Healthcare in association with Polymedicure Limited. And in this episode, I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Suchin Bajaj, who's the founder and director of Ujala Signals Healthcare Services. Now, besides being a medical doctor by training, Dr. Bajaj is also an entrepreneur who has very resiliently transformed the healthcare delivery ecosystem by specifically focusing on making quality treatment accessible, specifically when we talk about underserved areas of the country. Under his leadership, Ujala Signals has grown into a network of nearly 28 hospitals across North India, serving millions with a strong commitment of affordability, quality, equity, and patient dignity. So without any further ado, let me just tell you what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss all about Dr. Bajaj's leadership, his journey, probably right from where Ujala Signals started. So, Dr. Bajaj, first of all, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm very excited to learn about what we have in the kitty today.
Thank you very much for having me, and a very warm greetings to all the audience and listeners of your wonderful podcast. We've been following this for a long time now, and really excited to be amongst the luminaries of guests that you invite. So thank you very much for having me here.
Pleasure all us, Dr. Bajaj. Now, as I said that we intend to discuss everything that's gone behind many decades of you building the institution that we are in here today. You've built Ujala Signals from the scratch, and we all know about it from the ground up, with the mission to serve communities where quality care is often hard to reach, is what we hear from the interactions about Ujala. What inspired you to take this bold path, maybe, if I ask, and also a little bit about the early years when you decided to switch from a medical doctor who's treating patients to then become an administrator?
Yeah, I think like all entrepreneurs, mine was also an accidental journey. I was studying to be a gastroenterologist, and the practical, path of every doctor who goes into clinical work, that I did my MBBS and then my MD in internal medicine, and then was pursuing gastroenterology and wanted to be a top gastroenterologist. But some particular stories of friends and family, patients who used to come to see us from the far-flung towns, they really shook me out somehow that, something was wrong in the entire healthcare ecosystem of India. At that time, I thought that, there are already 20,000 doctors in Delhi. What will one more do to make a difference actually to people who need this healthcare in the small towns? And had a lot of family and friends staying in, towns like Sonipat, Panipat, all across Haryana. And me and my co-founder, Dr. Naveen Nischal, used to be together, and we used to think that, there has to be some solution to, these people who come from far off and then have to sell their houses, sell their fields, sell their lands, and then pay for healthcare. And even then, some don't survive, some don't even manage to reach Delhi, some, die on the way. So all these questions were there, and one day on a whim, I think we decided to start something. Both of us didn't have any money in our pocket, of course. So this whole model that we now speak of, the asset light model that has managed to scale up quickly with very little investments, was a model that was born out of constraint because both of us were short of cash. And I remember our early days, we used to sit together and have very long, very serious meetings. Now I laugh at the memory, but at that time we were very serious that, oh, this month we need a glucometer because many diabetic patients are coming to us. But we also need a nebulizer because children are coming, with asthma and something. So which one should we buy? Glucometer is 1100 rupees, nebulizer is 1400 rupees. And there used to be a full discussion on how much we can spend this month on which machine we can buy. If at that time you would have told me that, this organization that you are working on will grow into an organization with 1,000 crore revenue and presence all across North India, we would have laughed in your faces. We had not even heard of a 1 crore number, let alone 100 or 1,000 crore number. But those were the early days. I think we enjoyed a lot, had a lot of fun, put in a lot of hard work as well. But I think luckily we got good people to join in. Luckily we got good investors to back us who believed in this model of taking healthcare to communities that actually needed them. And this is how we grew. And yeah, we've been just, I think, at the right place at the right time with luck on our side. It was all quite accidental. Yeah.
Dr. Bajaj, good that you mentioned about how financial constraints or financial reasons have been a very core part of setting up sickness hospitals. And we've also heard you saying that denying care due to financial constraints is absolutely unacceptable at what you do at Ujala Sickness. But while you do that, we also know that this entire healthcare fraternity or a model is very, driven by costs and margins, to be honest. How do you make sure to uphold that policy or that framework while you're also in the business of healthcare administration, but also making sure that right from the reason why you set up Cygnus was to serve the people who can't afford? How do you manage to do that?
Yeah, I get this question a lot of times that, how do you choose between efficiency, low cost, and high quality? How do you choose? I don't think we have the luxury of that choice at all. See, we have to be very efficient, we have to be very frugal, and we have to be very high quality because our users demand it, our payers demand it. And these payers are not just individual patients. Patients, of course, in small towns don't have money to spend. Every year, we have almost 60 million people in India slipping below the poverty line just because of a single healthcare shock. So they don't actually have money to spend. But as I said, it's not just the individual payer, it's the government also, it's the private insurance also. They want you to bring down your rates and want to bring up quality all the time, right? When we were starting out, there was nothing like NABH or quality standards. You could just actually open a hospital and start serving there. Then these registrations started coming about that you had to register your hospital. Then the quality accreditations came about that you have to have a hospital according to this quality standard. Then the Clinical Establishment Act came about that, these were the penalties, these were the problems that you could be into. So all of this has started taking healthcare to a place which is much safer for patients, and the patient outcomes are quantified, they are reported, which is very good for patient care. But at the same time, it does entail expenses. Quality will always be expensive. You have to bring in new equipment, you have to train your manpower accordingly. Like, for example, in our times, it used to be okay to have MBBS residents manning your ICUs, manning your emergency rooms. But now, of course, NABH says that for your emergency rooms, you have to have emergency trained physicians. In the ICUs, you have to have intensivists. So all these are bringing up quality, but of course, the payments and the prices are not in your hands. The third party controls a lot of the pricing. Ayushman Bharat has a specific pricing, CGHS has their own pricing, and you can't change it, right? So sooner or later, everyone will have to walk down that path of bringing efficiencies into focus. As I said, when we started, we had constraint. There was no money in the system. There was no family money. Both Naveen and I were actually just past students or students. Actually, we were residents when we started out. So there was no background of money with us. In fact, I remember we borrowed the first 50,000 rupees to start off the first, quick small thing that we started. So this constraint taught us to treat money very respectfully and spend it with great thought, not to gold plate any of our assets. Make sure that each rupee had a bang for the buck. But at the same time, we had to ensure that quality was topmost because we were not a known brand. Nobody knew us. So we had to work even harder to build the trust in the community. Moreover, build the trust in our second most important stakeholders, our doctors who agreed to come and work with us. It's very difficult to convince a doctor to work in a small town in an unknown hospital, right? Because your natural pathways go to a big city. I remember when we were starting the first hospital in Panipat, everyone said, "What are you doing? उल्टी गंगा बहा रहे हो तुम." लोग छोटे शहर से दिल्ली आते हैं काम करने. You are already in Delhi in one of the biggest hospitals, and now you want to leave everything and go to a small town. How does that work? So it's difficult for us to convince doctors until and unless they have this belief that this system is geared towards quality, very patient centric, and will allow you to work in your best clinical way that you can. So, building trust in the patient and in the doctors who provide that care entails that you must be very quality conscious. There is no other way. I mean, I love to give this example again and again. If you're running a low cost airline, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to crash 2 out of 10 flights, right? Your outcomes have to be as per the most expensive airline. You have to take people from this point to this point safely on time. That is hygiene. So in a hospital, bringing out a patient safely, doing good quality surgeries is hygiene. There is no compromise on that. You can compromise on other luxury things, right? And you have to walk the talk. I can't say that I am building this affordable healthcare system, but when I fall sick, I will go to a big city expensive hospital. That doesn't work. So we walk the talk, we take the treatment where we offer the community treatment. My daughter was born in one of our own hospitals. My son has had 2 surgeries in one of our hospitals. So we use the exact same services that we offer to the community because we are very confident that these are high quality services.
You mentioned about gaining the trust of the patients as well as the doctors that you're onboarding. Which one was more difficult? May I?
I think both have their own challenges. So, as doctors, I think it worked well in the beginning because both Naveen and I were doctors ourselves, and we were, as we like to call ourselves, what we call P2P. So, PN to promoter. So, we used to handle everything, seeing the patient, managing the hospital, overseeing the housekeeping, running the trolleys, everything. So we could bring in more doctors into the system because we were there on the front lines. This worked very well in COVID because I remember in COVID, getting into the ICU with the first patient was a big hurdle. And I was the one standing there, okay, I'll do the first duty. When we opened our first 1,000 bed free COVID hospital in Buradi, which still, I had the largest field ICU in the country, 308 ICU ventilated beds, completely free of cost. I was the one who was there on the first duty. When the COVID vaccines came out, there was so mistrust about it, so much mistrust. So I was the one who sat in the hospital and said, I'll take the first vaccine. So leading by example is always easier when you yourself are qualified and you yourself can do it. So as doctors, it was easy. But of course, when we went to multiple hospitals, we couldn't be doctors in each and every hospital. So there, I think building the trust, getting the doctors in, getting good quality doctors to come in was a big struggle for us. Building patient trust is always difficult in the town when you start out. And then, word of mouth takes care of a lot of things. In healthcare, still, you can't really market yourself by advertisements or newspapers or radio. It takes word of mouth, it takes actual patient experience to tell the other people in the community that I was treated there, it was a good center. So it takes time, but I think it's getting easier with time. Now we know exactly what is needed, what to offer, what to talk about. But yeah, in the early days, both were equally tough.
It sure should be. And now, Dr. Bajaj, we've been talking about care in the, let's say, tier 2, tier 3 cities, but there's one disease burden that we know has been silently conquering every other disease burden in India, which is oncology, which is cancer. Now, since we are specifically talking about tier 2 or regional areas of probably northern India, there is an excessive cancer burden, we all know. There still is a problem that people do not know that they're maybe, under a grade 2 or a grade 3 cancer because of our poor diagnostic screenings, etc. But as an institution, how are you catering to the large burden of cancer that is there in the cities, or maybe probably by right at the end, helping them diagnose and then helping them navigate through the journey of the oncology patients?
Yeah, so really happy that you asked me this. So in cancer, it's a long drawn treatment, right? And the big city hospitals do not really accept government schemes or Ayushman cards. And these are the ones that have integrated cancer care. So if you fall sick with cancer in a very small town or a village, you have no option but to come to Delhi, Bombay, and then line up outside these hospitals. And then, you'll have radiotherapy, which is minimum for 4 weeks, 28 days. So you do that, then you do a surgery, then you chemotherapy. So you stay there for 2, 3 months. You run out of money, everything, and your entire family is there. You're far from home, nobody to support you, and no money at all. So this is something that's of great need. So this is how we decided that in addition to emergency, tertiary critical care, we also need to do cancer care a lot because people are suffering because of that. But of course, setting up an integrated cancer center requires a lot of money. Many, many, many thousands and millions of glucometers will go into that. So you need to have a lot of money to set up a linear accelerator in a bunker with a PET scan, with a mammography, all of that. So what we did was we started out with an experiment with medical oncology and surgical oncology in a town of all the places, Haldwani in Uttarakhand. People really ask me, why are you doing it in Haldwani in Uttarakhand? You should do it in a big city, close to Delhi. But I realized that in Kumaon, there is a big lack of these services. The entire Kumaon region, there's no good quality cancer care, and all the people come there. So, started out with that. It was immensely successful, very popular. A lot of people wanted that. And now we're setting up an integrated cancer center in Haldwani with all the radiation, etc., everything. And now we'll set it up in Srinagar also, in Kashmir. We'll set it up in Karnal also, in Agra also. So all these towns will go with cancer care because people do need it. And they are suffering and they have to live far from their home for months together to access these services. And this is very important for the community with the current pollution, current food habits, lack of exercise, air pollution, water pollution. Cancer is spreading very, very rapidly within the community. So prevention, of course, is very important, but if you are diagnosed, then treatment is important as well.
So cancer is rapidly spreading, but contrasting to it, honestly and candidly, cancer is still treated as a rich people's disease, at least in the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So kudos to what Ujala Cygnus is doing. Right. So we did talk about crisis a bit, and you also happened to mention about what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. But let me just come back to what was the COVID-19 era. It was new to all of us. nahi pata tha what is happening, what we are going to do, how, what is the next step. But as an administrator, Dr. Bitraj, both as a doctor and a person who's running a few hospitals, you did mention that it was very important to be at the forefront to set an example. But if you could just sum up the entire era of COVID-19, both, I mean, all the waves that happened specifically in Delhi, and some lessons that you'd, share our viewers with. What went through the COVID-19 with the Jala sickness?
I really, really hope and wish we never have to see those days again. Those were some of the darkest days that I have been through. But yeah, I mean, it was a very unknown time for us. Everything was new. Every day we used to get new data, new research, new drugs, and things ran out very quickly. Something that we could never have dreamed in our wildest of dreams, that a thing like oxygen would run out. I mean, in my training days, in my MBBS, MD days, it was like a basic thing. You needed oxygen, it was on a tap. You opened the valve, oxygen came out. And then those were the days where there was no oxygen, and patients were on ventilator, and you had no oxygen. And all our nights, I think I did not sleep for like 2 months. For the entire night, we were scrambling to find oxygen from somewhere, running to that plant, running to this industry. But the one heartening thing that really, really perked me up all the time was, you would have heard that, beds ran out, medicines ran out, remdesivir was being sold in black, oxygen was not there. But never did we hear that doctors or nurses were not there. They never stepped back. All the doctors, all the nurses were on the forefront. You did not hear that this hospital has no doctors now, or no nurses now. So they were always there. And I remember, as I said, of course, we had to lead from the front, but a lot of our residents I saw suffering deep personal losses of very close family members. They would go for 1 day or 2 days, do the last rites, come back on duty. Nobody stepped out. I remember one particular resident who, during the second wave, was down with severe COVID. And second wave was in May and June, the hottest months in Delhi. And being in PPE kits at that time, I remember I used to come out of a PPE kit after 6 hours duty. I used to have, fluid like it was like I had a shower inside, and I would lose more than a kilo every time just sweating out. It was so this resident doctor was admitted in one of our own hospitals in a 12-bedded ward, and he would tell me, "Boss, why do you need to come to this ward to take a round? I am here already." And I am sick, so I don't need to wear a PPE. So I'll take care of these 12 patients. Don't worry. If anything is needed, I'll call you. Then you come. So even when down with COVID, he was doing his own duties. So that was something that was very heartening. I was a part of an initiative called Project Step One, which was a voluntary organization built entirely of volunteers, not even one office bearer. Everyone was a volunteer. And I don't know if you remember those days. If you were down with COVID, you would get a call from somebody saying, "I am doctor this from Delhi government. You've been diagnosed with COVID. These are now the 4 steps you need to do. Stay at home, do this, do this." So all those were Project Step One doctors. Step One handled the helpline for 21 state governments without any name, without any fame, in the name of that state government, and managing all the helplines. 12,000 doctors volunteered on that platform. We did almost 98 million teleconsults, right from COVID diagnosis to home isolation to plasma bank management. All the plasma banks were being managed, donors, etc., to vaccine ushering, everything. Nobody wanted any name for themselves. Nobody got any money, of course, because they were all volunteers. And 12,000 doctors calling on patients and listening to their, dart all the time that my medicine has run out, there's nobody to take care of me, ya safai nahi hui hai. And they all did it. So it was such a heartening thought that actually, if you give a structure, everybody has good in their heart. But everybody then thinks कि यार मैं अकेला चना क्या भाड़ फोड़ लेगा ना, what will I do alone? No, this whole world against me. But if you give them a structure to latch on to, they're all willing to do good. So we just gave them a structure where they could do these helpline calls, and they all latched onto it and did free helpline calls. So I think we saw the worst of people also, black marketeers, hoarders who, they would hoard oxygen, they would hoard medicines, black market them. We heard of many cases where they were selling oxygen concentrators for like 100 times the price. But then we also had good people. We had a lot of good organizations coming together. So it was, I think, a mixed bag. But again, I would never wish it on anyone to see this kind of a pandemic again. I remember I used to get hundreds of calls every day. I counted one day, I had 513 phone calls on my phone, personal phone, asking for help. But the worst helps needed, I think, were some where people wanted me to help somehow to accelerate the cremation process. They were saying we are in front of the cremation ground, and they are saying it will take 2 days for us to cremate the body. And do you know anyone here who can, get us inside? So those kinds of conversations really, they break your heart and they force you to think a lot on what life is all about. So I hope we never get to see those days again. But yeah, those were the days where we worked continuously, I think, for months together, no sleep, no family time, no personal time. But yeah,
We've come out strong.
yeah, I hope so. I hope we have better systems in place now.
I mean, honestly, Dr. Bajaj, before hearing from you as a layman, we've seen the crisis that the country went through. We have seen people screaming on televisions, outside the hospitals, inside the hospitals, with the challenges and scarcities that you mentioned. No oxygen being there. Yes, there were doctors available, but then the medicines weren't available. And a lot of scams came into place at that point of time. But never do we realize what a professional or a doctor has gone through, whether it's a junior doctor, a resident doctor who also came at the forefront, or it's a senior doctor or an administrator. Everybody came into place. So I think that's an eye-opener for all of us, what really happened down there. Talking about reforms and changes, Dr. Bajaj, now let's say if you're in a position to transform by one bold decision or many bold decisions, what probably would be the one first decision that you'd like to take that probably can reform the entire system of healthcare delivery in India?
So for me, I think although my day job is running hospitals which focus on emergencies, I am truly a preventive care physician at heart. I really feel that, prevention is better than cure. And nobody really wants to have a disease and be cured quickly, right? You wouldn't want to have a heart attack and be cured by a big German machine for that heart attack. You would like that, I don't want to have a heart attack, I want to stay healthy. So I think I would really push the government to incentivize primary care, preventive care a lot more than is being done currently. Sick care takes a lion's share of the health budget. And we all want to, see big hospitals coming up. We have a 1,000-bed hospital. We have a 2,000-bed hospital. We have robots. We have cath labs. All these things look and feel very nice. Every doctor wants to be a super specialist. Nobody wants to go into preventive care, primary care, because there's no money there. There's no fame there. There's no power there. But I really hope that the government can drive some systems where we promote preventive care, primary care a lot, so that, one, we keep the population healthy. Second, we spend much less amount of money, because sick care is very expensive. Primary care is very cheap and gives you a lot more results. Second, I think, as I said, universal healthcare will not be achieved, and we are aiming for universal healthcare in India by 2030. We are aiming to be healthcare's Vishwa Guru by 2047. It won't be achieved by building 1,000, 2,000 bed robotic hospitals in big cities. It will be achieved when each and every citizen, whether they be a villager, whether they be a small town person, are able to access emergency healthcare within 20 minutes of their household, right? Where your PIN code doesn't determine your destiny, whether you're going to survive a heart attack or not. So incentivization of hospitals being built in small towns, of medical schools being built in small towns, is something the government should definitely look at, whether in terms of it is incentivizing the healthcare organization or the doctors themselves. That is something the government must seriously think about, to make sure that we don't have 75% of our doctors serving just 20% of our population in the big cities, and the rest 80% population has to do only with 1/4 of the doctors the country has. So if we have to do reverse brain drain, this is something the government really seriously has to think about.
Now, Dr. Bajaj, on the closing remark, through these years of experiences, I'm sure that you might have come across many, many young doctors or entrepreneurs, budding ones, and young professionals who aim to, build an institution like yourself. Do you think that you'd like to, share a message with them just for an understanding of how their idea of building an institution can also be purpose driven, like you've done?
Absolutely. I think we really need thousands and hundreds of thousands of young doctors to go and serve the communities where the need is. It won't happen if we all stay in the big cities of Delhi, Bombay, and the state capitals. So I think to the young doctors, the real need is in the small towns, and the people really respect you. They really love you if you go and serve there. In a big city, you'll be lost. Nobody knows you. In a small city, you are a star. So, and there is no pollution. There is no travel time. I mean, you don't spend 1 hour on the road. I mean, I remember one of our friends who joined a small town hospital. So he was looking for a house, and he found a very nice house about 15 minutes away from the hospital. Going from Delhi like 15 minutes, was like he's very close.
Blessing.
So he got the house, and then he, went to the hospital the first day. So the hospital owner asked him, "Oh, where are you staying?" So he said, "I found this house very close, 15 minutes. Oh, couldn't you get anything closer to hospital?" So for that small town hospital owner, 15 minutes was like, "Oh, why are you driving 15 minutes? Find something closer." So I think there's a lot of opportunity in small towns, and if you persevere, you'll get returns which are extraordinarily out of proportion to what you'll do in a big city. The need is there now, the ecosystem is there. People like us, we already have hospitals there where you can come and serve, or you can set up your own hospitals, much cheaper to do in a small town compared to a big city. So I think the future is in these small towns, and it's becoming a very flat world now. There's not that big a difference which used to be when we were younger, that oh, Delhi has so many things which a small town doesn't. Small towns have each and everything which is exactly the same as a big city, and without the added pollution and traffic. So I think all of us urge you all to come and serve in the small towns, see it for yourself, and I'm sure none of you would want to go back.
Right. On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Bajaj, for sharing your journey so open heartedly with us. I'm sure the viewers today and me myself are, leaving this conversation with the fact that healthcare is not just about building hospitals and bigger institutions, it's also how purposefully you build it, be it compassion or be it equity in the position or affordability and accessibility, everything. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you very much to all the audience for listening in patiently. And I hope if we can convince even one young doctor to go and serve in the small towns after this podcast, our purpose would have been achieved.
Well, I'm sure of it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.